Welcome back, ALHT106 students, to yet another week of the online lectures. I'm gonna, give the illusion of intimacy here and say it's good to see you all again. Obviously, though, I can't see any of you. Hopefully, it's good for you to see me again as we come back for yet another week. So this is the week 6 lecture 6 in our series, when, according to the unit guide, we're moving on to cognition and memory, or as I'm calling it here, just memory, for reasons that I will explain as we first get into this. So, as you would have seen coming into this on the lecture plan, this is the structure of the lecture that we're going to be doing today. So, as always, we're starting with, what is the topic we're dealing with, kind of defining it, though that'll be particularly quick and easy this week. And then we're going to talk about the essential metaphors that we use to understand human memory, to break it down on a cognitive level into its structural bits and pieces, so that you can understand, kind of gain a new view on exactly how it is that memory works, not to take its various features for granted along the way. And while I will touch on the structural anatomy of this a little bit along the way, it's almost impossible to avoid when you're talking about the psychology of human memory. I'm going to try to focus on function as much as possible, not only because those of you who have to know the neuroanatomy of this will learn bits and pieces of it, later on in your allied health degrees, but also because this is relevant to the essay topic that you're going to be answering on this. There'll be a memory component to it, and in that we are not looking for diagnoses, we're not looking for, regions of the brain which you might presume somebody is injured or things like this. We are taking a functional approach here. We just want to use that as a platform for all of you to talk about what you know about memory and the different ways in which it works. So I'm going to be sticking very close to that. As usual, I'm not going to give you the full psychology picture of this, just what you need to know to be effective allied health clinicians. So what is memory? Now, because in the syllabus this is described as being memory and cognition, cognition has come up a couple of times. In fact, the cognitive psychology perspective is one of the 5 perspectives we use along the way here. Because a lot of you will be uninitiated to this, I should just quickly take a moment here to define what we mean when we say that. Cognition is an umbrella term that we use in psychology, behavioral, and cognitive sciences to basically describe mental processes, to talk about information processing in the brain as analogous to the way a functional machine or a computer would accomplish those tasks. That is, on a very rudimentary and molecular level, what our minds, what our nervous systems are doing when we think about anything. It has a lot of historical value because when people were first discovering this perspective, they assumed it applied to some things and not other things. But in essence, that's what we mean when we talk about cognition. It is taking the emphasis in mental and behavioral science on how things are worked out, the actual way that mental processes work, how they crunch the information behind the scenes and produce the judgments that make the world meaningful to us. So, every particular topic you might want to look at in in psychology, we will nowadays say has some cognitive component to it, even things that back in the day were framed as being kind of the opposite of traditional conceptions of cognition. Even things like emotion and motivation, as we talked about in the last couple of weeks, have cognition components to them. And today is going to be no mistake on that. When we're talking about memory, it's going to be very consistent in that sense. All the psychology perspectives we've talked about along the way here, cognitive psychology is the main domain of psychology that's taught us a lot about human memory, so that's very much the lens that we're looking at this from. And it'll also come up next week when we're talking about intelligence, when we're talking about different levels of cognitive ability and how that varies between individuals in the population and the impact that has on how people are able to live their lives and the impact it has on their health. But again, we're not talking about cognition in the broad sense here. We're talking about memory. I mentioned this very briefly when we were talking about behaviorism and learning some weeks ago, back in week 2. But when you really get down to it on a mechanistic level, on what's physically happening inside of somebody's skull and in the rest of their nervous system, memory and learning are the same phenomena in many ways. Like they're all just about your brain, your nervous system rewiring itself in very subtle ways so that it will respond to similar stimuli in different ways in the future. I have to be clear here that even though it's the same underlying mechanisms that we're talking about here, it's all about neural rewiring, the connections between neurons in the brain that we refer to as synapses, just new ones forming, old ones that are useless being lost, and the particular connection strengths of those synapses changing over time, that neural rewiring is the basis of both learning and memory. The reason why in psychology, especially referring to human beings, we talk about memory and learning as being two different phenomena, even though they're the same thing when you really get down to it, is because for us, we have special faculties of memory that operate so distinctly from just passive learning, that operate in such definitive ways to allow us to recall things and bring out particular units of information from the past, that the metaphors that we would use, the metaphors that will structure the best way for us to talk about what that phenomena feels like and how it performs in a species like us, will actually be very different than the metaphors and conceptual terms we used to talk about learning. So again, the underlying notion is that we have a use it or lose it rule. That's the most guiding principle of how the neural networks of our brain works. Neural circuits that we use more often strengthen, gain new connections, and grow stronger connections and responsivity over time. Things that we don't use decay. That'll come up a little bit when we talk about the decay of stored memories along the way here. But the important thing to keep in mind here is that, the dendrites and axons, the communicative and receiving, other way around, the receiving and communicative components of neuron cells, a lot of you from the biology background will be more familiar with this, the way they wire to each other, the way they electrochemically communicate, just changes in those patterns and changes in the firing sensitivities is really all that happens in both learning and in memory. Again, I have to emphasize, we're going to speak about memory in very metaphorical terms here, just because the kind of species we are, human beings, with our massive cerebral cortices, have very, very complicated memories. We're capable of a lot of distinct different feats of memory along the way, and because of that, in order for us to wrap our heads around it with the limited scope of attention that we have, we'll use a lot of metaphors along the way to simplify this, and they'll just be a set of different metaphors and terms than we used in learning. So the essence to really sort of take out of this is that we're going to give you functional metaphors for memory along the way here that makes it comprehensible, to the limited human perspective, but same phenomena going on under the scenes. If we were talking about a much simpler creature, if we were talking about a cockroach or a nematode worm or a sea slug or something like this, memory and learning would be indistinguishable. They'd be the exact same phenomenon. But for us, for human beings, memory is very big. It's very complicated. Let's get into some of the details of this. Let's talk about those metaphors. I'll see you in the next video.